I'm Professor Hilary Hinds from the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University.
And I'm Dr. Claire McGann, also from the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. And Hilary and I are really excited to be recording this video today because it gives us a great opportunity to introduce you to one of our favourite figures in English literary history. We're going to talk to you a little bit about a woman named Anna Trapnel, who lived in London in the mid-17th century. Now, Trapnel wasn't particularly wealthy. Her father was a shipwright who built boats for his living. And she was also a woman born into an age characterised by large gender divides and all kinds of misogyny and cultural prejudices against women. So she was a woman and not a very wealthy woman. So she may seem an unlikely candidate to have become a notorious figure and to have become a person who had her words and experiences recorded and published in multiple printed texts during her lifetime. Now, what distinguished Trapnel was her powerful and passionate religious experiences. Trapnel had ecstatic trances and claimed to receive spiritual visions and messages directly from God. Trapnel's followers positioned her as a kind of prophet, like the prophets Isaiah and Daniel that we find in the Christian Bible. Like them, Trapnel orated her divine messages to fairly big audiences. And as I've already mentioned, Trapnel's words were also published so that people could read her prophetic discourse too. Now, I know, Hilary, you've done a lot of work on Anna Trapnel, so this video is an opportunity for me to ask you when you first encountered this kind of figure in literary history and sort of what hooked you into Anna Trapnel's work.
Well, I think I first encountered her when I was an undergraduate, but in a very, very small way, because I took an optional module as part of my English literature degree, which was called Literature and Revolution. And we looked at all kinds of figures from the middle years of the 17th century. So during that English revolutionary period, people like Gerard Winstanley and John Lilburne and so on. I don't think we studied any women as part of that course. This was, I think, probably about 1978, so it was a very, very long time ago. But as part of that course, I came across this book, which I don't know if it's showing up very clearly, but it's Christopher Hill's The World Turned Upside Down, and it's a book all about the radical religious groups of the middle years of the 17th century and the way that they agitated and travelled and wrote and orated about their political programmes. And I remember reading that, and there's a whole chapter on women in there, but it's all about free love. That's the context in which women appear. But Anna Trapnel, I think, is there in 3 footnotes, and the name stayed with me. And after my undergraduate degree, I started thinking about postgraduate work, and I remembered that undergraduate course, which I'd really enjoyed. And I remembered this mention of women being involved in the activities of those years. So I went off and I found out a bit more about Trapnel. And of all the women writers of those years, this was the writer who just caught my attention, partly because of she was quite prolific, I guess, for the time. I mean, in particular, in 1654, there were 4 texts that were published under her name, and they were all very different from each other. Some were prophecies, as you were talking about, some were autobiographical, and there was an immediacy to her voice. She seemed to speak in a very direct and engaging and quite sophisticated way, and that's what attracted me to Trapnel, and I wrote about her as part of my research for my PhD, and I've kept thinking and reading and writing about her ever since. So what about you, Claire? How did you first come across Anna Trapnel?
Well, I think this period of English history is such a fascinating period of history. So it's kind of similar in a way to what you're saying there that when you find a course on this kind of revolutionary period, the English Civil War period of history, and it often doesn't get studied at school. I certainly didn't do it, this period of history, when I was at school. It was only later when I came to university. But it's also kind of similar to what you were saying, that Anna Trapnel's voice is very vibrant and very kind of personal, and it's a way of hearing someone speak from this period, which is great too. I, like you, discovered her as an undergrad, but I discovered her through an edition of The Cry of a Stone, which is one of those publications you were talking about there, from 1654, which is a really fascinating text from one of these ecstatic trances I was talking about earlier, where Trapnel is kind of receiving visions and messages from God, and they're delivered to an audience. And it was, I think, just mentioned in a lecture in passing, and again it kind of piqued my interest, and I thought, I want to find out more about this text. So I went away and read the book, and kind of have been hooked ever since, I guess. For me, it's the publishing aspect of this that I'm very interested in, and how did this woman's words become texts that people at the time were reading? What does it mean to print these words from a woman who's claiming this kind of divine intervention? So for me, I'm very interested in how those texts were printed, who was printing them, who was reading them, and how we can read them today.
Yes, I mean, those are the kinds of things that certainly I became interested in. And I think one of the things that I sometimes get asked about is, well, surely, you know, this kind of writing, it's not really literature, is it? I mean, it's not the kind of thing that you would necessarily expect to find on an English literature program. And I mean, I guess because I came to these texts through my studies as an English literature student, it seemed to me that they're eminently legible through the kinds of skills and the kinds of approaches and ideas that certainly I was learning about as an undergraduate and then as a postgraduate student. So it was really interesting to read Trapnel and to think about what it meant to be an author at that time, given that she was a prophet who claimed actually not to be an author. She was just somebody who was, you know, kind of channeling God's words. So it was really interesting to think about authorship in relation to her. It was interesting to think about the place of gender in the production and the consumption of writing in the mid-17th century. It was interesting to think about voice, the kind of voice in which she was speaking and writing and so on. So all those kind of literary debates seemed both to feed into my reading of Anna Trapnel, and reading Anna Trapnel changed the way that I thought about those debates.
She's a great figure to kind of look at, to help to challenge some of the perceptions that we might have of this period in history. Kind of listening to what you were saying there about this maybe being a genre of writing that we don't expect to find on a syllabus of early modern or Renaissance literature. Many of the students watching this video now might think of this period of literature through kind of, I guess, Shakespeare's plays kind of earlier on in the early modern period, sonnets, kind of very stylized versions of writing, these kind of literary, canonical literary genres. And Trapnel's texts really help us to look at kind of a different type of discourse that was being produced, read and written in this period, and also challenging some of the conceptions we have of gender during this period too. Because again, as I sort of said in my introduction, this was a period of time where we know that there wasn't so much space for women, particularly in kind of the religious field of discourse. Well, that's certainly a perception that we have of the period. But then we've got this body of text from a woman who was claiming a very, you know, a religious authority at a time where we kind of expect that not to be happening.